Hi, thanks for joining us today. My name is Grady Wilburn, and I'm a statistician at the National Center for Education Statistics. And in honor of Black History Month, we thought we would share with you all some data about our Black students. And so you may have heard NAEP in the news, and generally the conversation is around achievement. But NAEP collects a wealth of data about our students. And we wanted to share these data with you to give you a better understanding of how Black students in America perform, where they go to school, where they live, to provide a better context for the results that you all may hear. And so before we dive into the achievement data, let's take a minute to better understand where they live, where they go to school, and some of our indicators of socioeconomic status to ground the rest of our conversation. As you may already know, NAEP doesn't assess all students, but instead assesses a representative sample of students across the nation. This map generally shows us where Black students in that sample live. We see that 58% of students live in the South and go to school in the South, compared to 19% in the Midwest, 15% in the Northeast, and 8% in the West. We've also noticed some geographic shifts over time, with a slightly lower percentage of Black students in the Northeast and a greater percentage in the South since 2005. Now, why is it important to look at variables like these? While we cannot support cause and effect statements, we typically see an association between these variables and student performance, and I'll get into that a little bit later. NAEP also collects data on the eligibility for the National School Lunch Program, which is our indicator of socioeconomic status, the type and location of schools where students attend. This chart shows the national average and the Black student average for fourth graders across the U.S. What you see is that a larger percentage of Black students are eligible for the National School Lunch Program, attend charter schools, and attend state schools compared to the national average. Looking at performance across these variables, we often see that students eligible for the National School Lunch Program perform on average lower than those students not eligible for the National School Lunch Program. In addition, students that attend city schools generally perform lower than students that attend suburban, town, or rural schools. So let's move into the meat of our discussion and discuss what NAEP can tell us about Black student performance. And let us begin with some information that you may already know. And that is that Black students perform lower than the national average. Here you see performance by grade and subject and percent at or above proficient for both the nation and Black students. That reiterates the point of low Black student performance. To help us understand what proficient means, it's defined as competency over challenging subject matter. Now, what you may not realize is that the average score for Black students are generally around the cut score for basic performance, meaning that on average, they have partial mastery of the knowledge and skills that NAEP measures in various subjects. Now, let's get into some of our state and our trial urban district data and highlight those jurisdictions with high and low performing Black students. As a reminder, our trial urban district assessment, our TUDA, allows us to report scores for several large urban districts across the country. When we report TUDA results, we will compare those scores to the average performance for students in large cities. Let's begin with grade 4 mathematics. On this slide, we see that Black fourth graders in 7 states to the right scored higher than the national Black student average of 224, which you see represented in the middle there, and Black students in 8 states, those states to the far left, scored lower than the national Black average for fourth graders in math in 2015. Average math performance for Black fourth graders ranged from a score of 212 in Wisconsin and Michigan to a score of 233 in Texas and 236 for Black students in Department of Defense schools, or as I might refer to as DODEA. Moving to grade 8 mathematics, you see that there are fewer states where Black students perform significantly higher than their peers across the nation. The average score for Black 8th graders in math was 260. From state to state, the average performance for Black 8th graders ranged from 248 in Alabama to 269 in New Jersey and 271, again, for Department of Defense schools. In grade 4 reading, we once again see a large number of states where Black student performance is significantly higher and lower than the national average for Black students. Here, the average score for Black students was 206 in 2015. From state to state, the average performance for Black fourth graders ranged from 192 in Michigan to 217 in Arizona and Massachusetts, and 228 for, again, Department of Defense schools. Finally, looking at grade 8 reading, we once again see less variation in scores for black students from state to state. In 2015, the average scores for black students was 247. Scores for black students range from a low of 238 in Arizona to a high of 259 in South Dakota and 273 for Department of Defense schools. So perhaps by now you've noticed the theme. In grades 4 and 8, reading and math, black students in the Department of Defense schools, or DoDEA, are outperforming their peers across the nation. They are also the only jurisdiction where black students at or above proficient are higher than their peers in the nation across multiple grades and subjects. And this includes science, although we are not focusing on science today. We are focusing on just mathematics and reading. Now, DoDEA isn't the only state that stands out. Black students in 5 states outperform the national average for black students in multiple grades and subjects. These states include Indiana, Massachusetts, New Jersey, North Carolina, and Virginia. And you can see the grade and subject in which those states' black students outperform their peers nationally. Now, it's important to recognize, however, that there are also states where black students perform lower than the national average for black students across the country. These include Alabama, Washington, D.C., Michigan, Mississippi, and Wisconsin. Now, focusing on our TUDA data, our Trial Urban District Assessment, there is only one district where black students are outperforming the average performing of black students in large cities, and that is Duval County. Scores there are higher for grade 4 and 8 students in reading and math. Though not highlighted here, I do want to note that black students in Boston and Charlotte also score higher than their peers in large cities for grade 4 and 8 math and grade 4 reading. So to this point, we've been focused on the results of black students from the 2015 math and reading assessments. We also want to talk about where black students have been making the most improvements across the country. So this slide and the ones that follow show the states where black students have made significantly changes, either going up or going down. And these changes are different from the national black public average. So let's start with grade 4 math. On average, black students improved their score by 4 points, as you see there in the dark blue arrow, from 2005 to 2015. Black fourth graders in 16 states also made significant gains in that time frame, with Arizona and D.C. demonstrating the greatest gains of 14 and 15 points respectively. Scores for black fourth graders in 2 states, West Virginia and Kansas, decreased over that time period. In grade 8 math, we see that on average, black students improved their scores by 6 points from 2005 to 2015. And black 8th graders in 17 states also made gains in that time frame. Once again, we see that black students from Washington, D.C. made the largest gain with an increase of 16 points. The score for black 8th graders in 1 state, South Carolina, decreased over that time period. In grade 4 reading, we see that on average, black students improved their score by 7 points from 2005 to 2015. Black 4th graders in 20 states made gains in that same time frame. Similar to grade 4 math, Arizona stands out this time with a gain of 24 points. Scores for black students did not decrease in any states. Finally, in grade 8 reading, we see that on average, black students improved their scores by 5 points from 2005 to 2015. Black 8th graders in 12 states made gains in that same time frame. Interestingly, while scores for West Virginia black students decreased in grade 4 math over this time period, they made some of the strongest gains in grade 8 reading with an increase of 14 points. Scores for black students did not decrease in any states over this time period. Again, switching to our Trial Urban District Assessment, or our TUDA data, we see 11 districts have been in the TUDA program since 2005 to 2015. Of those 11, we observed 3 districts where black students improved their average scores in both grades and subjects. That includes Boston, Chicago, and Charlotte. To note, black students in San Diego improved in 3 of the 4 grade subject combinations. And so now we've talked about which states and districts have the highest and lowest performing black students and where black students are making the greatest gains than their black peers nationally. Going back to the point that we discussed at the beginning of our conversation, we know that on average black students are performing below the national average, and there's a significant achievement gap between them and their white peers. And so for this last part of our conversation, we'd like to take a look at where black students are narrowing that black-white achievement gap. So this chart reflects where the achievement gap between black students and white students is shrinking more than the gap is shrinking nationally. Now, there are a lot of ways an achievement gap can narrow, but the ideal situation is that we see both groups improving. That is, white students going up and black students going up, but the increase of black students is such that the gap begins to close. And those situations are shown in the gold box. The teal box reflects situations in those states where the gap is narrowing because only black student scores have improved their scores over that period, and white student scores are flat. The top bar, you see the national public gap and how that has changed over the last 10 years. But you see Alabama has outpaced that, for example, in grade 4 reading, narrowing the gap by 10 points. And again, we see Dodea in grade 4 math and in grade 8 reading, narrowing that gap faster than the national public narrowing. And finally, Georgia in grade 4 reading. And again, let's turn to our tutor districts. There are 2 districts where the achievement gap has narrowed between white and black students. In both situations, the gap closed because black students were making gains, but their white peers did not over that same time period. Those 2 tutors include Jefferson County and Atlanta, Georgia. Not mentioned here, we also have some gap increases. For grade 8 math, in Chicago, we saw a 19-point white-black gap increase, and in Miami-Dade, we saw a 13-point white-black gap increase. Those are both in grade 8 math. So we've covered quite a bit of information today, so let's take a minute to just summarize some of the highlights of our discussion. Most black students assessed are from the South. However, there have been shifts in the size of black student population across the regions in recent years. Average scores for black students often fall near the cut scores for basic performance, while nationally, the scores are around the proficient range. The highest performing black students attend Department of Defense schools. The achievement gap between white and black students is also narrowing in some grades and subjects in the Department of Defense schools. The top performing states for black students include Indiana, Massachusetts, New Jersey, North Carolina, and Virginia, and again, the aforementioned Dodea schools. And when we turn to our trial urban districts, we see that stories can be found in Duval County, Florida, Boston, Massachusetts, Chicago, Illinois, Jefferson County, Kentucky, and Atlanta, Georgia. And so I'd like to thank you for joining us today. We've enjoyed sharing a deeper understanding of our Black American student achievement, and we hope you have too. Don't forget that the new mathematics and reading data will be available for national, states, and TUTA on April 10th. Please stay tuned for our Facebook and Twitter channels for more details. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.